IVM.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories, India's very own travel podcast, where each week we share the journey of travelers in their own words and relive their experiences with you, our listeners.
Hi guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories. Hope you're all well and keeping safe. A very warm welcome to any new listeners who are tuning in to the podcast for the first time. The Musafir Stories is a travel podcast exploring places in India through engaging conversations with travelers. So get ready to vicariously discover India one place at a time. On today's episode, we talk to a returning guest, Tanisha Guin, who logs her travels on her Instagram page called Steps and Streets. This time, she takes us to a coastal district in Maharashtra, but goes beyond just the beaches and the forts and shares some fascinating stories of the diversity of the region. Sit back and enjoy as we find out more about this beautiful paradise in Maharashtra. So, with that introduction, we'd love to welcome back Tanisha Guin from Steps and Streets. For those of you wondering, Tanisha has already been with us in a previous episode. She did a wonderful job covering the border town of Mirik. So, Tanisha, thank you so much and welcome back to the Musafir Stories.
Thank you for that wonderful welcome, and it's lovely to be back here again and talk about yet another interesting journey that I had.
Thank you, Tanisha. We are really eagerly looking forward to where you're taking us to. But for first-time listeners, I did give a brief intro, but if you'd like to tell a little bit more about yourself, your travel style, and also how you document your travel experiences, please do so, Tanisha. Just a quick intro about yourself.
So, hi everyone. Like you all know, my name is Tanisha Guin. I am based out of Mumbai. I enjoy traveling and I enjoy going to offbeat places, specifically places that are rich in history and culture. Speaking of which, today we'll be covering a very interesting journey that I had embarked upon. We are going to cover the western coast of India, one of the districts in the Konkan, and it's the Raigad District. So we'll be looking at different coastal towns very close to Mumbai, which you can, cover in maybe over the weekend, or if you wish to travel slow, you can take it slow and spend a week there. This place has a lot of things to explore, and that is what I would suggest.
Wonderful. So the district of Raigad it is, and I'm always happy and excited to cover places in Maharashtra. Maharashtra is almost like a Pandora's box to me. Each time I discuss a place with a new traveler on the show, it gives me so much learning, and also happy coincidence that a lot of our listeners also happen to be from the state of Maharashtra. So really looking forward to this. And Raigad district, like I mentioned, is also very close to Mumbai. So that way, for weekend trips or road trips, this is a perfect getaway. At the same time, also being quite offbeat, right? It's not as populated as some of the other places in and around Mumbai are. So let's jump into this by starting off with when is a good time to travel?
So speaking of which, the best time would be in the rains if you want to take a road trip. The roads are fairly decent. You can definitely cover it during the monsoon and the winter months. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, being the coast, it could get a little hot and sultry during the summer, so monsoons and winters are a good time. Now, in terms of access and getting to these places, I know you mentioned that road trip is easily doable, but just in terms of getting there, how did you cover this trip?
So I covered this trip in the Roro service that has recently started. So that cut short the travel time by good 3 hours each way. So that was very convenient, and that is how we could manage to cover a lot of these places in just a day.
Okay, that's brilliant. And this Roro service that you refer to, basically the roll-on, roll-off ferry type of service, right? Where you could just get
Yes.
onto the ferry with your like vehicle with
Yes,
your two-wheeler car, whatever that is, and
right.
just hop off at the nearest jetty and wherever you have to get off to, and seamlessly drive away. Beautiful. So thank you for setting that context. And just in terms of the distance traveled, and also before we get into the specifics, do you want a high-level touch upon the places we are going to cover today?
Right. So within Raigad district, we will start with Alibag. Then we will cover Revdanda. Then we would be looking at the seaforts of Korlai, the coastal town of Korlai, Murud, and the nearby villages.
Brilliant. So even in terms of distance, like Alibag is like barely 100 kilometers, I think, from Mumbai, and obviously, like taking the ferry will just make even that bit easier because you don't have to drive that distance. But let's start off with Alibag and give us a little bit of a sense in terms of what you were seeing there, and also what was your intention when you started off this trip in terms of covering the different places. Obviously, in terms of the options, there's definitely the beaches, there's the coastal forts that there are, there's rich history, etc. What were you looking to get out of the trip?
I had first visited Revdanda when I was, just 17 years old, and it was one of my first solo trips in Maharashtra. And back then, I was very intrigued with what I found. Like the beaches were solitary, there were not many people who knew about these towns. The temples were very different in terms of architecture. There's a lot of craze about the coastal state of Goa, but these beaches that lie very close to Mumbai are not that covered. However, things changed now that it's 2022, and some of these beaches have definitely become way more popular than the rest. But most tourists who go to Alibag don't really know about the cultural side to it. And like people going from Mumbai or Pune, Alibag is just a weekend destination. It's just a place where you go to relax. But this place has so many stories to unfold. And when I read about it and when I saw the sea fort, I got very interested in knowing how this fort came up to be here. What's the story like? And I did briefly spend a few years of my childhood in Vasai, which is a town in the outskirts of Mumbai. So Vasai has a very rich Portuguese history.
Sure.
And when I read about it, I realized, oh, these are all connected. Like the
Right.
fort in Revdanda, the fort in Kodlai, the Murd history, these are all somewhere interlinked to the Portuguese, and I was even more fascinated. So, like bits and pieces of my travels from the past led me to cover this beautiful journey that I did. And when I started reading about it, I was all the more fascinated as to, oh, I just knew about the Portuguese. Then we have the African origin rulers, and then there are the Britishers. Then, there are history of having found Dutch cannons inside the Murad fort. So I was like, wow, this place is very exciting. So
Yeah.
this is the backstory that led me to actually travel to this place and look at it from this historical lens.
Yeah, very, very exciting and a lot of things to uncover, like you said. But yeah, let's start one by one and start off with Alibag. What are the different kinds of things that and stories that you discovered, uncovered that left you very surprised in Alibag?
So Alibag, like we know, like I told you, it's a popular weekend destination, but historically, it's a very interesting place. So starting with the name, first of all, so Alibag came to be known as Alibag because there was a rich person named Ali who owned a lot of coconut groves, orchards in the coastal town, and he did a lot of public welfare as well by building wells for public use, and people were fond of this person, and that's how they fondly started calling the place Ali Chi Bagh. So, in Marathi, that literally translates to Ali's garden. So that's how the name came to be known as Ali Bagh. And I didn't know that Alibag. and the nearby towns had this kind of a story where, back in, say, 2200 years ago, uh, a ship got shipwrecked, that had seven couples traveling from Israel. And it was in the beaches of Nagaon. I happened to visit Nagaon when I was traveling solo to Revdanda. And what Nagaon looked today is obviously very different, but I had no clue that this is how the Beni Israeli community came to existence in Alibag. Like that beach is where they got shipwrecked and they met the local Koli community. Then they started working with them, as oil pressers to oil the ships. And some families of the community stayed there since. So now in Alibag, like if you travel close to it, there are two synagogues. I happened to visit one which is close to Revdanda, and it's very interesting to see that you find these houses that has the Star of David, which is an important religious symbol in Judaism, and
Right.
you meet people who speak Hebrew and a mix of Marathi as well. They don't have a Creole as such that I'm aware of, but but I do know that they speak Hebrew and Marathi. They are very much Maharashtrian in the lifestyle they lead, but the faith is intact in Judaism. That's how the Beni Israeli community came into being in Alibag. And
Yeah.
apart from that, there are some forts very offbeat called the Kolaba Fort, which was used as the base of Maratha Navy initially. I
Right.
could not get to visit the place, but I did read about it, and I definitely want to try visiting it in my next visit.
Yeah, some very interesting places, and yeah, this connection to the Beni Israeli Jews, basically, right? That dates back to over 2,000 years ago. That is also quite fascinating, and yeah, even the etymology of the name, right? Nobody would have thought that this actually ties back to a Jewish name, and yeah, even in my research, I came across that it's called Eli or Eli,
Ellie, Ellie,
Eli,
yeah,
right? Yeah,
right.
so I think that's just a that's how Ali it came to be known as Alibag, maybe because of the local pronunciations as well of the Marathi or the Koli folks there. Is there more to Alibag that you did, or from this point you started going southward towards Revdanda?
Yes, like we moved to Revdanda in the south. Whenever I visit Revdanda, I always like going to this particular temple, which is built in beautiful Konkani architecture. It's called the Rameshwar Temple. Then obviously the synagogue falls somewhere between Alibag and Revdanda. It's the Bethel Synagogue. And very close to the Rameshwar temple is the Kanhaji Angre Memorial that I pay a visit to whenever I'm in the vicinity.
Okay.
This time I did a very short walk around the town of Revdanda, and definitely the fort and the beach.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the temple because even while I was looking up in preparation for this episode, this is one of the things that really stood out from your trip and even in general from the temples that I've come across, right, in this region. The Rameshwar temple, obviously, it has influences of Konkani architecture, but even then it seems like very very unique in terms of how colorful it is as well as the interiors also, right? For example, do you want to touch upon those things like some of the unique things you also noticed while visiting the temple?
I like the temple specifically because it's a good mix of vernacular architecture, what you said, Konkani architecture, and the colors used are very bright and they are
Yeah.
very modern day, and it's very well maintained. Like the main center of the temple still has the old architecture intact, very well maintained, with the arches, with the pillars that you see inside. The
Yeah.
Mangalo tiles, it has the wooden pillars and very intricate details on those pillars. Then there
Yeah.
is the deep stump where you light candles or diyas during the festival. At the porch, you see that the temple opens up to a very big kund,
Mm-hmm.
a very clear water, very well maintained again. Just visiting one of these temples is a very grounding experience,
Yeah.
and for me, it's like a good mix, a very interesting cultural mix. So I make sure that I visit the synagogue, I visit the temple, and I visit the seaforts. So when you're doing it with curiosity and with interest to know the place, then you do feel connected to the place. Not necessarily in a religious way, but by just reminding yourself that this place was really something back in the day.
No, definitely. Apart from all of these beautiful things that you called out about the architecture, one of the things that stood out for me and I loved was also the interiors, right? Right from the chandeliers to the tiles, also, right? The flooring. It was really, really beautiful. Thank you so much for calling that out and covering that. Now, in terms of the fort that you were referring to as well in Revdanda, right? The fort was also fairly stand out, I would say, in terms of how it was the ruins of the fort, if I may. Do you want to highlight some of the features of the fort and what you saw in the Revdanda fort?
So, speaking of Raigad Fort, it's a sea fort. Again, dates
Mm-hmm.
back to the time when Portuguese rule was at its peak. So there's not much to see in the fort. Like it's in a very dilapidated condition, and it's basically more like ruin. But there are two things that really stand out. One is the bell tower, and
Mm-hmm.
another thing is the ruins of a church that once was in the day back in the day. So when you drive through the town of Ravedanda, you see there are these coconut groves. There's this beautiful sea breeze that flows, and then you enter this, like you go deeper into the town, and you see the fortification. It's like you drive from the fort, like within the
Right.
fort,
Yeah.
and the sea fort is like if you walk deeper inside the fort. So you have to park your car at some point. You visit the bell tower, and then you see that the fort opens up to this wide stretch of the sea. So even today, when you drive through the fort walls of Revdanda, you'll see there is a mention of the Portuguese crest in one of the places. You see there are certain things written in Portuguese. So Revdanda back in the day was mostly referred to as Chaul, Chaul, Chaul. So most people still call it as Chaul. A lot of people call it as Revdanda. So I'm not sure when the name changed and what brought that into being. But it used to be a very important port town, and people living in Chaul were known to be wealthy. They like there are evidences that speak that people who lived in Chaul always wore expensive silks. So yes, it was very rich in trade in terms of horses, oxen, cows, and because of its good prominence with the Middle East, a lot of Egyptian as well as Middle East and Europe. So a lot of Egyptian and Venetian ships also would come to these seaports.
Yeah, I think to your point, it seemed to be like a very like a place of importance in terms of the port there, and that's why they built the fortification around it to protect their shipments that were coming into the port, right? And I think the beauty just gets amplified in monsoon, especially, and I'm sure for a lot of photographers, this is like heaven, right? The ruins with the moss and the coconut groves, like you said, obviously with the
Yes.
sea in the background, it's just so beautiful. I could just imagine the sea breeze like kind of hitting your face and your hair, and just a beautiful time to visit during the monsoons. Now, in terms of continuing the journey, where to from Revdanda? Like we covered a couple of places here, the historic connections to the place. Where next to from here?
So after Revdanda, we would be heading to Korlai, which is also a seafort, but it's on the top of a hill. It's again not more than 20 to 25 kilometers from Revdanda. I happened to randomly visit Korlai in back in 2017, and I was very intrigued by this fort that's just lying there on a hilltop. And back then, nobody really knew about it, and it was very very offbeat. We spent a day just in the fort, and we were like, it was just a few of us. Not even the locals visit the fort that frequently, and neither do outsiders like people coming from Mumbai or Pune. But now things have changed because Revdanda has gained a lot of popularity of late, especially for the Christmas parties that happen by the beach. So there is a lot of irresponsible tourism that comes into picture, and Kodlai also is gaining popularity, but not for the reasons it should. So personally, why I like Kodlai is because when I read more about it, I realized that it's the only Portuguese speaking village of India. And that took a while to sink in, right? So I was like, oh wow, this is very fascinating to know about. So in the village, when you visit the village, they speak a Creole. So a Creole is a hybrid language, which is a mix of Portuguese and Marathi. It's called Christi.
Okay.
So Christi is the language, which is a Creole. And Korle again has a very interesting mix. If you go in the village, like a part of the population of the Portuguese who once ruled in that area. And then there are the Muslims and the Koli community. If you look at the village, it's like divided in three tiers. And the Portuguese community is the one that speaks this Creole called Christi.
Okay.
So, and then speaking of the fort is an fairly easy hike. During the monsoons, I would not recommend hiking all the way up to the fort. It might be risky. And even the locals don't allow people to visit it. But you can definitely go till the base, enjoy the view, and then you can drive back. However, in the winter months, it's fairly better to try a hike. It does not take more than 20 to 25 minutes maximum. The views are breathtaking. So when you go at the top of the fort, you see the coastal stretch of Rev Danda. And when the Portuguese started losing control, Korlai and Rev Danda were the only two forts that they still had control over. So historically, that way, these forts were very important for the Portuguese rulers.
Yeah, yeah, very different from, let's say, Revdanda Fort that you visited, right? That's beach facing and more built as a fortification to protect the port, but this one is more on the hilltop. So, in terms of views, breathtaking, like you said, with the views of the coastline. And I think a couple of interesting things I also came across while looking at the Christie or the Portuguese Creole that you mentioned, right? The people who speak this hybrid language. Basically, like some amount of digging, where it led me to was that as the Portuguese, like you mentioned as well, as the Portuguese started to lose power and places that they were ruling, initially it spread all the way across the coast, right from here till Diu and Daman in
Yes.
Gujarat. So it spread all the way across, but as their power started to decline, most of them basically left and they moved and consolidated in Goa, right? Because in Goa they were there until like the late 1900s. So when they left, some of the locals, so I mean, some of the Portuguese soldiers and administrators who had married into the locals, they stayed back in places like this, places like Korlai, and they're the ones who basically preserved and came up with that hybrid kind of language. And also the one of the factors that also helped conserve and preserve this language was that the area is also a little bit cut off, right? It's cut off by the Revdanda Creek, so it's not easily accessible to the mainland. Up until like only in 1980s is when like a bridge was built for a permanent connection to the mainland, right? So up until then, it was fairly isolated community, and that's how the language grew, like literally over a couple of hundred years at least, right? 200-300 years. It has lived and survived, and even today you see that language when you visit the fort, like people speaking that language. So that was kind of really fascinating for me also to know that this is kind of gone through the grind, because otherwise, like you mentioned, there's Muslims living there, the Konkani Muslims, there's the Koli community obviously, and the Marathi speaking community. So in spite all of the influences, they've still kind of maintained the language, which is just quite surprising, right? So it was good and very unique to kind of find this kind of language in India. And like you mentioned, I think this is probably one of the few or the only Creole that you can find in India, right? So
Yes.
yeah, some very interesting facts, and glad that you got a chance to cover this place a little bit more closely. Where next to from here? We touched upon a couple of very unique stories in Korlai. What next, Tanisha?
So the next place that we explored was Murud. Uh, it's popularly known as Murud Janjira. And along the drive, you do come across this palace, which appears to be abandoned, but it is not. And when you look closer and when you read about it, you come to know that this was the palace of the African origin rulers called the Siddhis. And the Siddhis played a very important role in the history of Murud. And they ruled there for around 500 years. So the palace came into being much later, but prior to that, it was just the fort. And people, like the fort was like a living town. People lived inside the fort because it has two fresh water springs. So that made life in the fort very much accessible. So the palace came much later, and it's called the Ahmadganj Palace. It's a private property. It's still, I think, it's the 14th generation of the Siddhi who owns the palace right now. So yes, after that you drive towards the main town of Murud. You come across very beautiful homes, colorful homes. It's a scenic, quaint coastal town, and then we cross the main town and go towards a village called Khokri. So Khokri is where you find the tombs of these African origin rulers called the Siddhis. And there are a lot of tombs in that area scattered, of which the biggest tomb is of Siddhi Surul Khan,
Okay.
who served as a commander in the British Navy.
Very, very interesting connection. And what I also saw and a little bit of reading up was basically these guys came in initially as mercenaries or soldiers, right? They would be commanders and stuff like that in armies, and slowly they grew in power. And obviously, the first guy who became very powerful was this guy called as Malik Amber, right? He had a
Right.
very, very significant role to play, and eventually he went on to become, I think, the prime minister or something in the Ahmednagar Sultanate. Again, the Ahmednagar part of Maharashtra. So that's, I think, the initial way that they rose to power, and slowly, right from, I think they began with the Bahmani Sultanates first working for them, then slowly Bijapur Sultanate, and then the Mughals. So they kept switching sides and basically became feudatories of whoever was in power, and that's how they continued to be in power. They were
Right.
that way very shrewd, right? And that's how they could, over time, like I mentioned, I think like 400, 500 years they ruled this place. So over time they built, I think, quite a powerful bastion here, and the region of Murud Janjira, and even those tombs that you mentioned, they're very beautiful, right? I mean, maybe not as grand as some of the others you see, let's say in Rajasthan, places like that, but Indo-Sasanic architecture, and very grand looking, and same with the palace also, right, that you mentioned, the private property. That's also very beautiful. But yeah, the overall connection and the theme that we have seen in your travel across the coastline, of different influences on the Konkan belt, right from, again, Portuguese to the Beni Israeli Jews to now the Siddhis, and fascinating, right? So sometimes you don't tend to pay or heed so much attention to this. You just like brush it with, oh, Mughals ruled it or oh, Marathas ruled it and then British came. But if you look a little closer, there's like so many layers underneath. So, but yeah, just a fascinating story of the Siddhis, right? And that also reminds me, just before I forget, if some of you have visited Ahmedabad, right? There's a very popular mosque called the Siddhi Sayed Mosque, right? And it has this beautiful lattice work and stuff like that. I mean, it wasn't ruled by the Siddhis or anything, but it was again a Siddhi nobleman who actually commissioned the building of that structure, is what I understand. Just kind of draw, it helps you draw those connections also, right? Oh, it's the same people or members of that clan or that community that actually moved across and set up base in other locations. And if I'm not wrong, I think there's also some Siddhi community in some place in Karnataka. I may be wrong.
Yes.
Maybe I'm confusing between Karnataka and Gujarat, but yeah, they're definitely still present in India. Now, in terms of other places or experiences to cover in Murud or places around the area, is there anything else you'd like to call out?
Yes, I would definitely like to speak about the baobabs. So, if you've seen the movie Madagascar, you might you,
Yes.
you might be able to recall these giant trees with wide trunks.
Yeah.
So they are called the baobabs, and you find them even in India, and you find them along the Konkan coast in a lot of places. So there are a lot of them in Mumbai, and I was very fascinated to find them in near the Kukri tombs. Like there are around 4 5 baobabs there in that area. A lot of like historians suspect that these could come in with the African slaves that the Portuguese got in because the origin of baobabs is Africa.
Right.
So, yes, that's another very interesting thing to know. So, whenever I am driving along the coast, I always keep an eye out for a baobab, and it's like my sweet spot. I really like these trees, they stand out.
Yeah,
And
and I mean they're believed to like also live for a very long time, right? I don't know,
yes,
a few like over 1,000 years or something is
yes,
what I remember reading that, and also just a little uh, personal selfish connection. Even in Bangalore, if somebody's wanting to like check out a baobab tree, there's actually one in this Lalbag Botanical Gardens. There is a baobab tree, so ask
oh
around
wow,
or research around. Yeah, I think it was probably yeah. I mean, in terms of the connection, I'm not very sure, but yeah, Lalbag, this garden has plants and trees and species from all over the world. So I'm assuming they got this as well as a part of that period. But yeah, just a little personal
no, but it's
connection as well.
really fascinating. Like I wasn't aware that there is a baobab in Bangalore.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's interesting, and in Africa also, yeah, like you mentioned, right? They're originally from Africa, and there it's actually like taken very seriously. Also, it's almost like they're very, very the people when the tree dies, they
mhm.
almost treat it like a human death. They have like very exclusive ceremonies and stuff like that they perform once the tree dies. So it's very revered in Africa, just for the amount of time it lives, and also huge, right? I don't know like how big they are. The one in Bangalore is also not very big, but they can grow like very huge. The trunks can be huge, so
Yeah.
that's another unique feature of these baba trees.
I think they also have really over a lot of scientific uses. Uh, so maybe it's because of that. The ones that you spot in and around Murud are at least 1,000 years old.
Yeah, another very unique thing, I guess. So, if you're around the region, if you're visiting the Kokri tombs, the tombs of the Siddhis, especially, you can check out some of the baobab trees. Any other experiences that we missed out on, Tanisha?
Yes, speaking of the coast, I would like to talk about the beaches.
Yeah.
So, speaking of which, mostly people who come to Alibag often explore or often just go to Nagaon, Kihim beaches, which are very popular. But if you want to go offbeat, Kodlai is not as popular as it its other counterparts.
Mm-hmm.
Revdanda is quite popular, but there are different times of the year where people don't really visit Revdanda. It's just become famous for all the Christmas night parties and stuff. But during the day, when you visit Revdanda, it's different because you get to interact with the local fisher folk there. And if you're keen on experiences like that, then that's again an interesting feat. Then moving forward, when you go towards Korlai Murud, the Kashid beach is again very popular, but most people don't go beyond that if they want to visit a beach. However, when you drive beyond Kashid, you will find these solitary beaches, like often these narrow trodden paths, and these by lanes lead to solitary beaches. So we randomly happened to find one on our way. I am not sure what it's locally called, but it was just a random beach that we walked up to. We saw the sunset, very beautiful beach, and it was entirely to us. There was literally no one, no tourist, just a couple of kids playing around. So, and very clean. So that's the best part of it. And if you go offbeat, you really do find places like these, and the entire experience feels like a full circle.
Yeah, I mean, duh, right? we, we're talking about the coast and we didn't touch upon the
Yeah.
beaches, but also I think it's also a big compliment to you in terms of the different types of experiences you carved out for yourself as a part of that trip, that it wasn't just about the beaches, right? We barely spoke about the beaches and still we talked about so many different things and so many different stories. And that's what's beautiful about travel. It's also as much about perspective as about just seeing places, right? You
Right.
can choose to focus on a thing or on a niche and just go in a rabbit hole and discover so many wonderful things about the place, about the connections, about the people. So thank you so much again. Firstly, thanks for coming back. Thanks for being nice enough to come back and indulge us and our listeners, Tanisha. And secondly, thank you again for just covering this very, very beautiful part of the country. And it's such a melting pot. I mean, we tend to use the word melting pot very loosely, but in this case,
Yes.
we literally saw an example of it, right? Right from the nature aspect of it, right from the beaches to the mangroves to the ghats, right, the Konkan coast itself,
Yes.
and the people, right, even people from all of these different origins, literally living, surviving, and ruling, and being a part of this subcontinent, right from the Portuguese to the Siddhis to the Beni Israeli Jews, Marathas, Kolis, Arabs, Romans. I don't know how
Yes.
many
Yeah.
how many like ethnicities also we touched, right? So it's just so fascinating, and that's the great part about travel. It just who was this? Yeah, Ibn Battuta, like he said, right? It makes you speechless, then it turns you into a
Yes.
storyteller, and I think
Right.
it's just validation of that same statement. And thank you again. Thank you for coming back to the Musafir Stories. And in terms of people who are looking to follow your work, follow your travels, what's the best way of doing that, Tanisha?
You can follow my travel page. It's called Steps and Streets on Instagram.
Okay.
That is where you can reach out. Also, a part of this trip, I came to know about, a part of the trip that I came to know about was from a tourism company called Swadesi, which
Mm-hmm.
runs these cultural and immersive tours specifically focused on responsible tourism. So if you're keen, maybe you can check out their Instagram page. It's Swadesi, so Swadese.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for calling that out. We'll make sure to include both Swadesi's Instagram handle as well as your Instagram handle, right? So that way listeners can follow and keep up with the stories. And thank you again for being on the Musafir Stories, and we look forward to having you back very soon.
Thank you once again, Musafir Stories.
That was yet another great episode on the Musafir Stories. Make sure to show us some love by sharing the podcast with your friends and family. We are on Instagram and Twitter at Musafir Stories. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or the website. Follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram.